John, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, I was thinking about it in advance of talking to you. If let's just say you're in Montana watching the show today, or California, and you're saying to yourself, do I really care about what's going on in D.C.? Like, why is what the president did yesterday important to somebody who doesn't live here, doesn't have a trip scheduled here? Why should they care?
Well, I mean, I think we care about other Americans just in general. And given the how high DC's crime rates are relative to other places in the country. I mean, their violent crime rate is more than twice as high as the violent crime rate in California as a whole. I don't know how many times higher than Montana, but I'm sure it's even more than that. And, you go back to 2023, the last year that we have kind of full data from the FBI, final data, D.C. had the fifth highest murder rate of any of the 60 most populous cities in the United States. People talk about the drop in crime over the last few years, and that's true. But you look at something like carjackings, which the president concentrated on. It had reached like 969 in 2023, and it's down to about 496 now. But that's still 5 times higher than it was in 2017 or 2018. Things by any reasonable measure are out of control. And people, if you care about other people, if you care about their lives, why do you want to see kind of places devolve into third world type areas?
All right, I hate to interrupt this conversation, but tonight, if you are looking for a great night's sleep, I'm going to help you big time. I switched over to Boll & Branch sheets, and my goodness, they have made a huge difference. They are so comfortable to get into every night. I love them so much. I literally ordered a second pair the other night and paid for them myself. That's how great these things are. And you can join me as well. The thread count, the quality is unbelievable. There's a 30-day guarantee, so you literally have nothing to lose. If you want a better night's sleep, it starts with your bedding. Go to bollandbranch.com/Spicer to save 15%. That's BOLLAND branch.com/Spicer for 15% off and free shipping. bollandbranch.com/Spicer for a great night's sleep. All right, back to the conversation. It's not time to go to sleep just yet. Do you also, I get that the legalities of what the president is doing is very different because it's Washington, D.C. It's a federal district. He has control of the National Guard. But I was thinking about it from the context of, if I live in St. Louis or New Orleans or San Diego or LA, I might say to myself, I don't know, I'm looking at it like the border, right? In the sense that we were gaslit for a long time and told there's nothing we can do here. It's not as bad as you can believe. And yet Donald Trump showed us clearly on day one of his presidency that was not true. And my thought was, if we can show that D.C. can be made safe again, then if you live in LA or St. Louis or Minneapolis, that you would say, excuse me, local leaders.
Right.
We don't have to put up with this. Look what the president showed us in Washington, D.C.
I think you're exactly right. Look, this isn't rocket science here. The way you reduce violent crime, is by making it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. Higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences that are there. If you look at the number of patrol officers that they have in D.C., they have like 1,300 patrol officers. Obviously, not all of them are going to be on duty at any point in time. Let's say you have 450, a third that are on duty at any point in time. They have 720,000 people that they have to go and protect. You look at the U.S. attorney during the Biden administration. In 2022, he declined to prosecute 67% of arrests. Even in 2023, he declined to prosecute over 55% of the arrests that were occurring there. That's not how you make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime. Judge Jeanine yesterday in her statements was talking about, hopefully changing the law so that she could go after more of the criminals there in D.C. than she's able to do. But she's changed it obviously dramatically already from what was there before. But there are other things. You bring up the border. One of the reasons why I think that violent crime is falling nationally is because of the changed policies that Trump has had. Not only are they going and trying to deport illegal aliens who have criminal records, but the very fact that even the people that they haven't been able to catch yet have had an incentive to keep their heads down. I mean, they know if they get arrested, they're going to get deported. And so what's one way to try to stay off police radar? And that is to go and not commit crimes right now. So I think, Trump is showing in many different ways whether or not they make a connection on something like the illegal aliens or not, and the national drop that we've been seeing in crime, is a question. But look, you're exactly right. Hopefully within a month, which is the 30-day window that Trump has there, we'll begin to see a dramatic change that's there. My guess is a lot of criminals might say, we may have gone over and just beat up somebody a couple days ago in a carjacking with the Doge guy. But if we go do that now, maybe there's an FBI agent that's nearby that's going to be able to go and get us. Or maybe the police are going to be more proactive. And so, if you see a dramatic change that occurs there, hopefully people around the country will realize, look, it's not that complicated. Just like closing the border was a lot less complicated than people thought it might be or were claiming. They're going to say saving lives. The one last point is Democrats claim that they care about the poor, that they care about the minorities in the country. Who do you think are the main victims of these violent crimes in these urban areas? If they really cared about these people, they would be in the vanguard to go and say, we got to go and make it risky for criminals to go and commit crime rather than going and trying to make life easier for criminals.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think the signal that you send matters. And that's what I think you're getting at. And during the Biden administration, right? You remember Kamala Harris famously said, when asked what her message was, she said, don't come. But then it was almost like, don't come, but I'm going to wink at you and say, but if you do come, here's what all of the prizes you get: a free hotel, a gift card, phones, right? And so if you know, and you and I both know this, I don't know your driving skills, but I'll just make an assumption that, I know that there are certain roads that might say posted speed limit 25, but it's never enforced, right? So I can get away with it. And I think what happens in D.C. and what had happened at the border is that people knew, if I break this law, it's not going to matter, right? In downtown D.C., if I talk to a cop, they're not going to come after me. To your point, they're getting away with things. And if the converse is true, if they know, if I do that carjacking, if I break into that CVS, I'm going to be arrested, I will be prosecuted, then it will serve as a deterrent. It's a signal. It's the same thing with our border. As soon as Trump said it's closed and we're going to deport, one of the things that I think is interesting to me is, and it's completely over the heads of the morons in the national media, is that when you start telling people you're going to deport them to El Salvador or send them to Alcatraz, Alligator Alcatraz, they say, God, I don't want to get caught I should just self-deport because I certainly don't want to end up with that. It's the signal that matters almost as much as anything else, John. And I feel like that's what you were touching on, where if we can start to say, when you go down that street in D.C. now, if I know I'm going to get caught and prosecuted, I might go hunting somewhere else.
Right. No, you're exactly right. Look, I'm an economist, and one of the basic tenets of economics is that if the price goes up for something, people buy less of it. If the price of apples go up, people buy fewer apples. If the cost of criminals committing crime or the perceived cost of criminals committing crime goes up, they're going to commit less crime. It's not a difficult idea. Anybody who's had kids knows that if you go and you tell them that there are going to be consequences for their actions, they're going to be less likely to go and cause the trouble that you're telling them not to go and do. So I couldn't agree with you more on those things. And I think Trump is educating people in a way that I think few presidents have ever tried to educate people.
You know, you mentioned you're an economist by training, so you deal a lot in stats. And you mentioned the data early on about crime. And
Right.
I got to ask you, as a guy who deals in this, do you believe the data that the FBI is putting out right now? Because I've made it clear, just so that I'm clear with you, I don't believe it. Because I think that when you stop counting things, when you stop arresting people, when you stop prosecuting people, of course it's going to look like crime is falling. But it's just that you're not actually capturing it anymore. So is the model flawed?
You know, you're exactly right. In fact, I kind of tried to bring this to national attention last year. Look, we have two different measures that we have of crime. One is the FBI data on crimes reported to police, and that's what the data that people point to in D.C. that we've been talking about. And the other one is total crime. And what you have to understand, and that's from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, their National Crime Victimization Survey. What you have to understand is that only about 40% of violent crime is reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. Prior to COVID, you generally had those two measures of total crime, which is what we really should care the most about, and reported crime were moving up and down together. But since COVID, they've been kind of going in opposite directions in many different years. And it's precisely for the reasons that you're saying. We've known for many decades whether or not people report crime to the police depends in part on whether they think the police are going to do anything about it.
Right.
Okay. If you don't, so like in 2022, the arrest rate for violent crimes and reported violent crimes in cities over 1 million was down to 20%. That's just mind-boggling that it can be so low. And that's just for reported crimes. When you look at for total crimes, it was down to like 8%. The arrest rate for property crimes, for total property crimes in those large cities was 1% for property crimes. And so, people have to ask themselves, is it worth their time to go and report those types of things to the police? And if it's not worth their time, you're going to have a gap that's going to be occurring there between, and I don't know, we don't have the data broken down like that for DC, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something like that occurring there too. And also, it's become more difficult over the last few years to report crimes to the police. In part, that's because the drop in the number of police officers that we've had in many parts of the country. But 6 years ago, if you had called up 911, they would have sent out a police car and a crime would have been written down being reported by the police. Now, in many parts of the country, if you call up, they'll ask you, is the criminal still there committing the crime? And people virtually always say no, they've already left. And then the operator will say, well, you can come down to the police station and wait in line and fill out a police report. And so there are going to be some people who are going to say, I would have had a police report done 6 years ago, but now I'm not sure it's worth my time. You don't need everybody to do that, but even if some people do that, you're going to begin to create this gap between the number of crimes out there and the number of crimes that are recorded as being committed. And so your point's exactly right on.
I want to pivot for a second to the economy because of your expertise. This morning we saw this inflation report come out. 2.7% in July. John, I keep saying this over and over again. The experts suck. I keep hearing it's almost like they're cheering for higher inflation and bad job reports. But the expectation this morning was that we're finally going to see the effects of Trump's tariffs. Inflation was going to rise. And we didn't. And the immediate reaction from the so-called experts is, well, we'll probably see it next month then. What do you think's going on?
Well, a couple of things, just kind of understanding the data. If you go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, the way the media would report these numbers is they would take the monthly rate that you have right now and extrapolate that out for the rest of the year. Right now, for this month, it was 0.2%. So that's an annual rate of 2.4. The 2.7 that you have there is what it's been over the last year. So that includes some of the numbers from the Biden administration that's there. And I'm not sure, to me, like maybe you just don't want the last month, but maybe the last few months or something like that. You look at the GDP, when the GDP was released, it was estimating that for that quarter, inflation was 2.1%. But look, I'm kind of a Milton Friedman type economist. I believe that inflation is essentially a monetary phenomenon. If the Fed's going and buying up lots of bonds and injecting money into the economy, that goes and causes inflation. If you have some prices go up because of tariffs or something like that, and you're not changing the money supply, other prices are going to fall. And you're not going to have overall inflation that's going to be occurring there. Will you create some distortions there? Yeah, sure you will. But that's different than going and talking about inflation occurring. And so, it's basically up to the Fed to determine. It's not just the interest rate, too. The interest rate stuff is only a small portion of the changes that they have in the money supply. They have to make a decision about how many bonds they're going to buy or sell. And they made the decision during the Biden administration to kind of monetize a lot of the debt that's there by going and massively buying up bonds and injecting cash into the system, which is what caused the inflation there. But tariffs aren't going to cause inflation any more than if the price of oil went up. If money supply stayed the same, then other prices would go down to balance that off.
Okay, so walk us through that, because you listen to a lot of, again, these so-called experts, and they're saying these tariffs are inflationary. The president was out truthing today saying, we're bringing in a ton of money to the Treasury because of the tariffs, and the economy's humming along. I know you've been very outspoken on this. Explain why the experts are wrong on tariffs and the impact that they are having on the economy.
Okay, look, tariffs, do they kind of reduce trade? Yes, they do. Do they go and hurt consumers? Yes. Do they go and reduce growth? Yes. But the thing is, what people aren't talking about is that's true for all taxes. If you have sales taxes, there are going to be trades that aren't going to be occurring. If you have income taxes, that reduces the amount of work people do or investments that they're going to make. The same with corporate taxes that will reduce output that you're going to be having there, or reduce investment. And so the question becomes, as an economist, so what Trump's often talked about, and what I kind of viewed the big, beautiful bill as being part of, is they raised he's raising tariffs at the same time that they're cutting other tax rates that are there. And, you look at something like the income tax. If you add up the federal top rate plus the top rate across states, you're talking about an average top rate of about 43%. For the corporate income tax across states and the federal government, you're talking about an average rate of about 27%. The tariff that we had prior to Trump was 2.5%. And what you have to understand is that the size of the distortion increases at an increasing rate with the level of taxes. So if I have a 20% tax, I'm going to get more than twice the distortion that I would have had for a 10% tax. Now, I don't know what the right tariff is, whether it's 15% as the agreement that they've been having with Japan and the EU or something, or if it's 10%. But I'm pretty sure that 2.5% is low relative to the rates that we have for income and corporate taxes that are there. And so, to the extent that you can balance these things off, I think the corporate income tax is particularly a pernicious tax, basically because it creates double taxation of the earnings for the companies that are there. Trump during the campaign talked about cutting the corporate income tax down to 15%. I guarantee, one of the big reasons why we had the boom during his first administration was cutting the federal corporate income tax from 34% down to 21%. That created investment from around the world. That investment made workers more productive and increased the productivity for workers, and therefore increased their wages that were there. And, because the amount that companies are going to pay workers depends upon how much they're adding to the value of the company's output, how much productivity that they're having. You go and invest more in workers, you're going to get more productivity. So, but in any case, there's a number of places that they've cut the effective marginal income tax rate in the big, beautiful bill. They've cut other taxes. And so I think the economists, so many economists, they'll just go and say tariffs interfere with trade. And that's true. Okay. But all taxes do that. And for some reason, there's this disconnect that these other economists have between recognizing that basic point and looking at the level of these different taxes and trying to figure out how we kind of minimize the distortions across all the taxes that are there.
So the president was obviously venting again this morning about Jerome Powell, calling he's too late Powell. To your point on all of this, should the president fire Powell and insist on a chairman who will cut interest rates, because it would do the opposite of kind of what you were saying the tariffs would do? It would increase, theoretically, trade and investment, et cetera. So is that a sound strategy? Would you, if he asked you, John Lott, hey, I'm trying to figure out whether to fire too late Powell, would you say go for it, Mr. President, or let's see what he does in September?
Well, look, I think Powell has completely mucked it up in many different ways. I blame, our earlier discussion, I blame him much more than almost anybody else for the inflation that occurred during the Biden administration. It's because they made the decision that they were going to go and buy a lot of bonds. And when the Fed buys bonds, they're essentially printing up money in order to go and buy the bonds that they have out there. And, I think in part, Trump criticizing him has caused him to kind of put his back up and maybe even being less likely than he might have otherwise been in terms of lowering the interest rates. I think he's just obstinate in terms of that, best I can tell him. I don't know the guy personally. I know people who know him. But, I think there's a value to having an independent Fed. I don't think you want to go and set up the precedent that presidents will go and do that, because even though Trump might be right on a lot of these things, I'm not sure that there are other presidents who are going to be kind of as right on these types of things. I mean, you look at what happened during Jimmy Carter's administration, for example. And so I guess I'm reticent to do that, but I don't think it hurts at the same time to go and do what President Trump does very well many times, and that is going out there and educating people. Now, I wouldn't make it personal in terms of going after Powell, okay, because I think you just get him to kind of put his back up and just be obstinate in terms of making it clear that he's not going to give in to the political pressure that's there. But I would go and explain to people, the implications of Powell's behavior, and I would go and make it clear that I blame Powell for the inflation that occurred over the recent years that were there, and that Powell should take responsibility for that. And maybe, those types of things, if you could educate people on that, it might cow Powell into going and doing the right things at other times.
Hope so. John Lott, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no, I love listening to you guys on the morning meetings and stuff like that. So,
oh, good.
You're having me on. Thank you.
You bet. Take care. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.